And it's so nice to see familiar faces again. And for those of you, there's some new faces here and some new names, which is great. Welcome. There goes off my Siri. Siri wants to know what I want to say. And so anyway, so welcome. If you haven't been to an Einblau session before, it doesn't matter because this is a whole new way of doing things. We have not done this before. I'd like to introduce Laura. Her name is, on screen is Rochelle, but I'm Rochelle. And Laura is our training consultant, and she's stick handling all the technology. So Laura, if you want to give everyone a wave.
Hello and welcome.
And so the muted by the host. Let's see here. I'm muted now. Okay. So the reason we're doing this is because we realize, we're in the people business and helping companies manage their teams and do all that. We realize now more than ever, the people first approach is really what's required. You've got people that you want to keep working, but at the same time, they've got maybe a family member who is on the front line in healthcare. And so their family has added stress. They have young kids with no daycare or family members abroad that can't get home. So the level of stress for our staff is varied and quite extreme now. And that's not even talking about the media stuff that's going on and how much people are inundated with those stories and the fear that brings in. So, decisions we make as managers and leaders right now are going to make it or break it when we have to ask them to step up later when this is over, and it will be over. And we need them to work super hard and get things back on track. So the way we handle things now with them is going to make all the difference. Do they still trust us? Do they feel that we have their back? Do they feel that we were concerned about them as humans and gave them the opportunity to do what they need to do? What we've been hearing in industries, companies of similar type, similar industries, some people made the decision to send their people home right away. Some people, their people are still working. And what are the optics of that, and what's that going to mean when we rely on them and need their help later? So we've got to think about those decisions. And so again, that people first approach is going to be really important. I personally have watched a lot of webinars in the last week and a half, more than I probably do in 6 to 8 months. And so there's a lot of information where, it's telling us what to do, or there's lots of educational information, and that's great. But what we were thinking might be helpful and supportive to people in our business community is to bring people together and have discussions, because there's a ton of collective experience and wisdom within the group that's in here. And we know from setting up and facilitating peer groups within companies that there really is, no replacement for that type of knowledge and that type of discussion. So that's what we wanted to build with this approach. Normally, these groups take about 2 hours. Like when we're running them in companies, it's around 2 hours. And I thought that was too big an ask of you all at this time. So what we've decided to do is build in some flexibility. We're going to be splitting off into small groups after Jason shares some of his knowledge with us. If your group decides that you want to continue on and stay talking, we will reopen the rooms at the end of the session. If some of you want to stay, but the rest of your group doesn't, I am happy to continue on, and we can facilitate discussion further on. So we're going to build in that flexibility for now. And then subsequently, we will be sending you a feedback form. So you can tell us with the value, how valuable this was or not, what kind of format you think would work best. And we'll use that feedback to design and build the next sessions going forward. So that's how we're trying this new thing out, and we want to design it in a way with your input. Okay. Other than that, I just want to say just thank you to Jason Mercier, who's here with us. He's got a lot of experience. When I was thinking about who to bring in to talk about communications, he's got this holistic approach. He's done internal communications, external, corporate, personal, being a journalist and having to tell those human stories. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Jason. You can share some of your thoughts on communications in this time. And then from there, we'll do our breakout sessions. If anybody has any questions for Jason, if you could please just record those, send them to me. I will follow up and make sure that I ask his advice and suggestions on those and send them out to everybody else. So thank you, Jason. I'll turn it over to you.
think Laura, thank you, Laura, and thank you to Rochelle as well. One thing I wanted to start off with was that I'd say almost 20 years ago, I was needing to draft up a crisis communications plan for TELUS, which was a client of ours at that time when I was working in agency. And I think at the time I was told to come up with the most extreme scenarios you can possibly think of. And so we had assassination of the CEO, kidnapping of your entire accounting department, zombie apocalypse, and global pandemic as examples of what we would say are the most extreme crisis communications situations that your organization could be in. And I was thinking about that yesterday, that it's entirely possible that the communications team at TELUS, who some of the people in our agency ended up going to work there and are working there now, are tapping into those crisis communications plans that were written years ago. I think one of the things, regardless of the size of your organization, you should have some basic planning in place to deal with crises. But I think that this is a highly unusual situation in that you've got essentially three things going on at once. Normally, a crisis occurs just for your organization, and that's not the case right now. This is a global issue, and it's affecting everyone on one level or another. You've got the health, which is for a lot of people is a personal trigger and is something that they're really concerned with. The health of not just themselves and their coworkers, but their families and their communities. So I think all of us realize that as a leader, empathy is very important. I think what I've seen on the external messaging side of things from many companies has been very empathetic for their employees, first and foremost. But I think the internal side is even more important at this point. And one rule, if there's anything you take away from this talk today, I would say is always communicate with your internal team prior to messaging being outside the organization. So internal before external, always. It takes maybe 30 minutes to come up with a key messaging response to any situation, whether it's internal or external. May take up to an hour. We always had a 2-hour KPI for anything that we did as far as getting it from the client and then back to the client within 2 hours, because that's really crisis level response. So think about that when you're dealing with a new issue. I think in this situation, so we've got health. The other one we have is people's employment and the financial security. So not only is there the health aspect, you've got layered on top of that, everybody is concerned about their employment right now. Everybody is concerned about the financial security of their organization. So when you're developing your internal messages and you're communicating with your team internally, first think of health. How are they doing? Second, think about what can you say to them regarding their employment security and the financial security of the organization. I think that those two things are sort of first and foremost. Those are the first things out of the gate. Most of you probably have already done that with your teams. The third thing, and I think this is something that even we're seeing today, and Rochelle even touched on it when she was doing the introduction, is the effects of change of work life and technology. There's a lot of dinosaurs still out there that insist on their employees showing up for work regardless of what goes on, There's different labor laws, regardless of where you are and whether you're in a union or non-union environment. Those things are all coming to the fore now because there's the initial response to what's happening with the crisis. But then the secondary response is that people may have to actually change their work relationship with their employer. And I think that's that takes more thought in how we're going to address that and how do we communicate that. Because even as leaders, you don't really know where your organization is going to be 6 months from now. You can hope, you can certainly execute on plans to try to stay a viable organization, to do things in a different way. Whether what we're doing today becomes a permanent thing or whether it becomes a measure where more companies and more meetings are held by virtual, I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think what happens is your workday ends up going from when you wake up to when you go to bed. And I think that's something that no one's really concerned about right now, but I think that's something that we have to be thinking about when you're messaging internally is people are also stressed just by the fact that their work routine has changed. So I think we really need to address how will technology be integrated into your team. We don't really know. I mean, some teams work that way. I was talking to my friend at Deloitte. They've been essentially fully virtual for a long time. A lot of other offices, depending on how old their leadership team are, I know CEOs who don't have a printer at home and don't know how to print off and scan a document. So there's a learning curve that I think a lot of people are having to undertake that wasn't there, and has always been there as something that people who are looking at the changing in using technology. I think this is people are being forced to change the way they do business, and that now is happening on a global scale. So I think at the end of the day, it's a very positive development, but I think what it's going to do is it's going to change the nature of work forcefully, whereas in the past, people voluntarily have gone there. So there's a significant number of employees will be stressed by that. They're going to be stressed by the change in technology, and those who adopt technology can scoff at that. But at the same time, if you don't address that in your messaging, I think that's a missed opportunity of engaging with your employees. So I think those are sort of the three things that are happening at once. And I think that it's a highly unusual crisis communications scenario. Obviously, people look to their local health authority for direction. And I think I was on a call with the New York Stock Exchange, had a call yesterday, and they had a leader from the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta on. And she was very factual, but she left it open-ended. Unlike the politicians, she's not trying to promise anything about where things are going to go. She kept it completely fact-based, and I think that is a correct approach in communicating during crisis. Is even though you want to give security to your team and you want to tell them, yeah, you're totally safe, you've got a contract. Our company is well designed for this. Even yourselves and even the leaders in the company absolutely are concerned about this. And I think conveying the fact that you're concerned, but that you're all in this together, I think is something that's really valuable as a tool. The other thing I would say at this point is you want to have regular, if not scheduled, communication with your team. But also, I've been a big believer in what Tom Peters has done in the management by walking around. While you're going to be walking around virtually, is doing check-ins. I think that at least a daily check-in with people, whether it's on a personal level or whether it's on a more formal team meeting level, I think those are really important. I'm sure everyone has sort of weekly team meetings as it is, but I think that is something that you really you really need a place where people can, at this point in time, emote, but also try to keep the strategy first and foremost of where you're at and where you're going. Your strategy may not be very long-term at this point. You may just be looking at it on a week-by-week basis. So I think that's sort of a thing where you have a meeting and you talk about it. So like, well, what do we want to accomplish as a team this week? And I think it can be very simple, and it could be a 2-minute conversation, but at the same time, addressing any concerns that people have, because when you don't have that support of an office environment that some people are used to, I think that that creates an issue. If you've always operated remotely, I don't think there's a lot of change in that. I think you just may increase the frequency of your internal contact with them. I don't think that just doing a group email to the team necessarily cuts it. I think voice or video is something that you really want to actually increase at this point. We've always done that sort of tree aspect where each person takes a branch, and while you may have a virtual thing with the leadership team at the top, the next level down are all meeting in small groups together. And I think small groups is really valuable because it gives everyone a chance to exchange information. It's a two-way communication, and it also helps the senior leaders find out really what their employee base is thinking at that point. So I think as far as documents that you want to have on hand is always have key messages, always be updating the points, focus on health, focus on employment and financial security issues, and focus on the technological change that's happening and the way that work is changing, to leave it open. And in all cases, you don't want to have closed messaging that you're stuck with. I mean, you don't want to consider over-promising on employment or financial security. I've talked to a number of business owners in the last week who sat down and realized that even though they've got a great dedicated employee base, they're a 15-employee company, they know they're going to have to lay off at least half those people this next week, so the company can survive. I think that's something that it's not. There's no ill harm intended, but at the end of the day, this is a time where you've stressed the organization. You're testing your strategy, you're testing your messages as a result of this, and you're going to end up with better messages, and you want to improve teamwork at the end of the day. Because as Rochelle said, pulling out of this, as we all will, is going to take a lot of work and a lot of teamwork. I think to close things off, I would say that I think what your employees are looking for, what we're all looking for right now, is reassurance. Certainly, we've seen that from our health officers in BC and Alberta and globally. Express how proud you are of your team and the teamwork that you're doing, and then communicate regularly and randomly, because I think that direct communication one-on-one, it can be a 1 or 2 minute phone call. It's vastly going to improve the performance of your team now, and it's also going to improve the performance of the organization going forward. So with that, I'll give it back to Rochelle.